Most ERP programs don't fail all at once. They drift. At first, things feel manageable. Maybe there's some scope pressure, a few uncomfortable trade-offs. Nothing really seems fatal. Then one day, the program gets labeled as troubled. By that point, a lot's happened. Not in the system, not in the software. What's usually happened is that decisions were put off, often for good reason, until the program really had no more room to absorb them. And that's when executives hit a familiar wall. Do we keep going and risk operational instability, customer impact, and loss of control? Or do we pause and absorb cost, credibility erosion, and disruption anyways? That dilemma feels like a tech problem. Really, most of the time it's not. In many ERP programs, the real pressure builds much earlier. It builds when decisions about how the enterprise actually operates are deferred long enough that they start getting made implicitly. Look, ERP has a way of doing that. It takes questions that can stay abstract for years about ownership, chart of account structures, processes, data, and authority, and it forces answers at scale, under time pressure, with real consequences. That's why ERP so often becomes the moment when unresolved issues seem to surface all at once, not because the system's unforgiving, but because it's explicit. In a large share of struggling programs, what ultimately breaks down isn't implementation effort. It's governance of the operating model. Not because leaders don't care, but because decisions that felt deferrable before suddenly aren't. ERP doesn't create those issues. What it does is it's hardening them. Once you look at ERP through that lens, the warning signs start to change. They become clearer. They stop looking like normal project noise, and they start looking like something else. So warning sign number one, there's no clear owner of enterprise design. On the surface, this looks like collaboration. Lots of alignment language, shared accountability, everybody at the table, but underneath it, no one actually owns enterprise coherence. Each function optimizes rationally for its own outcomes, sales for bookings, finance for controls, operations for efficiencies. That works until ERP, because ERP doesn't operate functionally, it operates cross-functionally as a single system. When no one owns the end-to-end design, misalignment doesn't show up as a strategic debate. It shows up as operational friction that no one is structurally empowered to resolve. Warning sign 2, progress without trade-offs. Another common signal is momentum that feels good, but really never gets uncomfortable. Milestones are met and configuration moves forward, plans stay intact. But what's often happening is that decisions are being made implicitly. ERP configuration embeds trade-offs, pricing logic, approval thresholds, inventory ownership, customer hierarchies. When those trade-offs aren't made deliberately, they get made by default, usually with local logic, and often without enterprise decision-making. It feels efficient at first, and later it's really expensive to unwind. Warning sign number 3, data's treated as cleanup, not control. Data's another place where this shows up. Executives hear about conversions and reports and dashboards and future work. What's actually unresolved is decision authority. Data doesn't just support decisions, it defines who gets to make them and what they're making them upon. When leadership hasn't aligned on which data governs pricing, margin, risk, or performance, authority drifts. It drifts downwards, it drifts sideways, or even into the system itself. The result isn't a lack of information. It's a disconnect between strategic decisions and operational reality. Warning sign 4, change framed as adoption. This one's subtle and common. Change gets framed as a people problem, training plans, readiness metrics, adoption curves. But what's really happening is that unresolved operating model questions are being operationalized. We're training people on unclear decision rights. It doesn't resolve the issue, it accelerates their impact. And that's why resistance often gets misdiagnosed as behavioral when the real cause is structural. Strong delivery helps, but it can't compensate for decisions the enterprise never actually owned and made. Warning sign number 5, steering committees that contain risk. Finally, governance itself can become a signal. Steering committees meet and issues are tracked, escalations are logged, but arbitration keeps getting deferred. Risk is monitored, but it's not resolved. By the time those risks surface operationally, the remaining options are already constrained. And really, ultimately, this is how organizations end up in the trap. Too much invested to stop, too unstable to proceed cleanly. It really feels sudden when it happens. It's not. It's earned. It's earned through postponed trade-offs, unclear ownership, and governance that tracked more than it decided. When the pressure finally peaks, it feels like the program failed leadership. In reality, the program just removed the option to delay. So what can leaders do? Where are you now? Well, it depends, right? If you haven't yet started an ERP project, you're probably in the best position, and this is where your leverage happens to be the highest. Preparation that avoids operating model decisions is not preparation, it's deferral. So before your ERP project starts, decision rights need to be made explicit. Arbitration and resolution paths need to be clear. Responsibilities need to be allocated and intentionally reset, not assumed to carry forward. If it feels uncomfortable now, ERP is going to make it unavoidable later. If you happen to be early on in an ERP project, look, you still have options. Momentum can feel reassuring, but momentum isn't alignment. This is the phase where unresolved trade-offs need to be forced out explicitly into the open, where governance has to prove that it can actually decide, where executive attention shifts from progress to conflict deliberately. This is the last point where course correction looks like leadership and not recovery. Now, if you're late stage, at this point, your goal changes. It's no longer about success. It's all about containment. Not everything's going to be fixed. Leadership is now about stabilizing decision rights, protecting customers, regulators, and investors, and choosing intentionally where this damage is going to be absorbed. Late-stage ERP leadership isn't about saving the program. It's about protecting the enterprise. It's key. To wrap, ERP doesn't fail because organizations take on too much risk. It oftentimes fails because leaders wait way too long to take ownership of it.